Have you ever seen a courtroom so silent that it felt like it was holding its breath? Everyone inside knew something was about to erupt. That was the energy inside the Arizona State Superior Court that morning. No gavel had fallen, no arguments had been made, but everyone from the gallery to the jury box could feel it. The storm wasn't coming, it had already entered the building. Karoline Leavitt stood just inside the heavy oak doors, her blazer crisp, her expression calm, her presence magnetic. Outside, Phoenix simmered under a record-breaking July sun. Inside, the room was colder, but not from air conditioning. It was the kind of cold that came from anticipation and fear. To the left of the judge's bench sat the defendant, Brent Holloway, a construction mogul with deep political ties and an even deeper pocketbook. He'd made his fortune securing multi-million-dollar government infrastructure contracts across the state, but today, he wasn't the one in control, not entirely. Brent was facing accusations of siphoning nearly $18 million in public recovery funds into his own company's accounts, money intended for rebuilding bridges, schools, and rural roadways after a series of devastating floods. The paper trail was long, but the stakes were longer. Karoline had been called in not just as a prosecutor, but as a message. She was the legal firebrand, the one who didn't back down from untouchables. Young, focused, and armed with evidence that had already rattled private boardrooms across Arizona. She walked to her desk with silent confidence, and then he entered Judge Douglas Raines, the so-called king on the wooden throne, a man both feared and revered in legal circles. His reputation for cutting down attorneys mid-sentence was the stuff of legend. Some called him brilliant, others called him biased. But one thing was certain, he had never been challenged in his own courtroom, not until today. He took his seat, slowly, like a man settling into his kingdom. He didn't look at Karoline. Instead, he thumbed through a stack of documents deliberately slow, as if to remind the room that time belonged to him. Then, without glancing up, he spoke. "Miss Leavitt, I assume you brought more than just moral outrage and spreadsheets today. Or should we skip to the part where you waste the court's time?" The words weren't loud, but they hit like a slap across the face. A few people in the gallery chuckled, mostly from Holloway's legal team. Even Brent himself smirked, arms crossed, as if he were watching a game he'd already won. Karoline didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "This case involves the redirection of public funds on a massive scale. $18 million paid for by Arizona taxpayers is unaccounted for. That is not a spreadsheet issue, that is a felony." Raines leaned back in his chair, one brow arching. Taxpayer outrage. How original. Karoline's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she laid her case file on the desk, opened it, and calmly began organizing her first exhibit. Every motion was precise, controlled. The room had settled into a tense silence again, not one of order, but of calculation. It wasn't just about the case anymore. This had turned personal. Judge Raines wasn't hiding his disdain, and Karoline was refusing to let it knock her off balance. "Your Honor," she continued, "I'm prepared to present evidence of misallocated budget approvals, falsified reports, and testimony from multiple whistleblowers. This isn't a public opinion trial, it's about financial misconduct, plain and provable." But Raines didn't respond. He just stared at her, cold and unreadable. Then, finally, he said, "Proceed, but don't expect this court to entertain grandstanding. I want facts, not flair." The irony hung in the air. Flair was exactly what Raines thrived on. His courtroom had always been his stage. Karoline glanced at the jury. Their faces were impassive, but she could sense the tension rising. Something wasn't right, and she could feel it deep in her gut. This wasn't just about a developer who had gamed the system. It was about someone else, someone who had a reason to bury the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that person was already sitting on the bench. She turned back to her files. The first piece of evidence was waiting. So was the reckoning. She had seen arrogance before, but not like this, not from the bench. Not from a man with the power to silence the truth with a single ruling. Karoline adjusted the lapel of her blazer, keeping her eyes on the screen behind her. Projected in bold black and red were financial documents, line items, totals, and digital trails she'd spent weeks stitching together. Numbers didn't lie. But Judge Raines did not seem particularly interested in numbers today. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished bench, and sneered, "Let me save everyone here the headache. Miss Leavitt, this looks like a creative spreadsheet hobby gone too far, and frankly, The court has better things to do than chase ghosts in Excel. A couple of reporters chuckled. One even muttered, brutal, under their breath. Across the aisle, Brent Holloway's lead attorney, Jackson Miles, smirked with visible smugness. He didn't need to lift a finger. Raines was doing his work for him. Miles leaned back in his chair like a man who just ordered a cocktail on the beach. Karoline took a breath, slow, controlled, her fingertips pressed against the edge of the table. The room wanted her flustered desperately, but she wasn't about to give them that. Your Honor, she replied, steady as ever, this document isn't theoretical. It's an approved disbursement form from the Department of Infrastructure. The original contract stated an approved allocation of $8 million for Holloway construction, yet the bank records show over $17.6 million was transferred. She clicked the remote. A second page appeared on the screen, a payment timeline of digital receipts, state-issued invoices, and routing logs. That's nearly $10 million more than authorized, she said, with no oversight, no documentation, and no project expansion. Raines sighed loudly. So, we're just going to nitpick amounts now. Inflation is real, Miss Leavitt. Perhaps you're familiar. More laughter from the gallery, but this time, Karoline noticed something less amusement, more confusion. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. Even one of the court clerks raised an eyebrow. Karoline stepped toward the screen, gesturing calmly. This isn't inflation. This is fraud. It's organized, repeated, and deliberate. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of her words did all the lifting. Raines leaned back again, tapping a pen against his jaw. And yet, no smoking gun. Just a prosecutor making assumptions from numbers. She turned slowly toward him. Her expression didn't change, but her voice tightened by just a thread. Numbers don't assume. Your Honor, people do. For a moment, the air changed. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was sharp. Karoline didn't break eye contact. Neither did Raines. Then he broke the moment with a scoff. I've seen cases like this crumble under cross-examination, hearsay wrapped in decimal points. Shall we skip to the circus part, or do you still have charts left? His tone was getting crueler, less judicial, more personal. Karoline sensed the shift, and for the first time, she allowed herself a deeper scan of the room. Holloway's team was to relax the smirks, the confidence, and Raines wasn't just dismissing her. He was undermining her with intent. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't just bias, it was alignment. I'm prepared to proceed with witness statements and internal emails from the Office of Procurement, Karoline said, glancing at the next folder. Raines raised a hand abruptly, cutting her off. Not interested in gossip, he said flatly. Let's stick to hard evidence, which, thus far, I haven't seen. Karoline felt the sting, but didn't blink. She had prepared for pushback, but this was tactical. Raines wasn't just testing her resolve. He was guiding the courtroom narrative, blocking her momentum, and legitimizing the defense through snide commentary dressed in court protocol. It was subtle, but it was real. She closed the folder gently, not looking down. Your Honor, are you suggesting you will not allow my team to present state-certified correspondence between departments? Raines waved a hand dismissively. I'm suggesting that I won't allow you to bore the jury into submission with filler. Move on. The silence in the room grew heavier. No one laughed this time. No one smirked. Karoline straightened her spine, and in her chest, a new question had started to grow quietly, but unignorable. Why is he so desperate to bury this? Judges were allowed to challenge lawyers, to question evidence. But this felt like more than skepticism. This felt like interference. She turned to the jury, her voice lower now, steady. I'd like to call attention to Exhibit C, an interagency request for emergency disbursement funds tied to Holloway's bid. You'll see that 3 different budgetary reviewers sign off on the original $8 million, but no one signed off on the overage. She laid the document on the overhead projector. Highlighted text shimmered on the wall, but Judge Raines didn't look. He was already flipping through something else deliberately, like he hadn't even heard her. Karoline let a second pass, then two. No response. Your Honor, she said evenly. I'm formally moving to enter this document as primary evidence of financial misconduct. Duly noted. Raines cut in, not even looking up. Motion under review. No ruling, no rejection, just a stall, a deflection. And that was when Karoline knew he was playing a different game. This wasn't just a hostile courtroom, it was a rigged one. She took a slow step back from the podium, her mind racing. Somewhere behind the sarcasm and fake boredom, Douglas Raines had something to lose, and Karoline Leavitt, she was just getting started. There's a moment in every trial when the temperature changes not in degrees, but in energy. And when Karoline slid that contract across the table, the room got cold fast. She knew it would land like a bomb, and it did. "This is the signed agreement," Karoline said, placing the folder on the evidence table between Holloway Construction and the Phoenix Department of Urban Planning. "It details the proposed project scope, original budget, and disbursement authorizations." Her tone remained calm, professional, but there was an unmistakable steel edge threading through every word. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration. Raines glanced down, uninterested, until his eyes hit the bottom of the page. Karoline waited. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. At the bottom of the document, clear as day, was a signature, Douglas Raines. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was suffocating. Like the air had been vacuumed from the room. Even the gallery seemed to stop breathing. Raines blinked once, then looked back up. For the first time that day, his performance cracked. "That document is inadmissible," he said flatly. "On what grounds?" Karoline replied, her voice razor sharp. "It was acquired through inappropriate channels. No court-verified chain of custody. I won't allow it." Karoline took one deliberate step forward, then another. She didn't raise her voice. She simply made it impossible to ignore. "This document," she said, tapping the corner of the contract with her index finger, "was obtained directly from the State Archive, logged, timestamped, and verified under the Arizona Public Records Act. There's nothing inappropriate about it except, perhaps, what it reveals." The gallery buzzed with a ripple of tension. Someone coughed. A pen dropped. Then, from the back row, Samantha Pierce, a senior reporter from the Arizona Tribune, quietly shut her laptop, not because she was done taking notes, but because what she just witnessed had changed the story entirely. This wasn't a political scandal anymore. It was a judicial earthquake. Raines sat stiffly, eyes on the page, lips tightening into a colorless line. "I'm ruling it inadmissible," he repeated. "Why?" Karoline asked firmly. "You haven't cited a single statute. You're not recusing yourself. You're not denying your own signature. You're just suppressing evidence. This is not a debate." "Miss Leavitt," he snapped, "this courtroom is not your soapbox." But his voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was stretched, frayed, and people were starting to notice. Karoline held his gaze, her voice dropping to a whisper meant to carry. "Or maybe it's not my soapbox that worries you. Maybe it's what's written in your own ink." The words hit hard. Even Brent Holloway's attorney shifted uncomfortably. His client, who had spent the morning smirking, was now sitting, unnaturally still, like a man watching the foundation crack beneath his feet. Karoline took a breath, letting the moment settle. Then she walked back to her table, slow and measured. No theatrics, just presence. The jury wasn't looking at her. They were staring at Raines. And that shift, it was everything, because in a courtroom, perception matters as much as proof. Raines leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, hands folded to stop them from twitching. "Proceed with your next exhibit," he said finally. The words landed like gravel. Karoline opened another folder, but her mind was racing. That signature was no accident. Raines had personally authorized a disbursement to Holloway's company. Beyond the approved budget, no oversight, no vote, just ink. And he knew she had caught him. But he didn't know that wasn't all she had. She turned to the screen again. But her focus wasn't just on the numbers anymore. It was on every breath Raines took, every twitch, every veiled command. She wasn't arguing a case now. She was unraveling a system. "Your Honor," she said, clicking to the next slide, "this document tracks the disbursement timeline. You'll see funds began transferring from the state budget within 72 hours of that signed approval. No secondary authorization, no review board, just a fast lane to fraud." Raines didn't interrupt, not this time. He stared at the screen. Then slowly, just barely, his hand moved to cover his mouth. That was the tell. Karoline clocked it. The mask had slipped, and somewhere in the courtroom, maybe in the jury box, maybe in the press row, someone was writing a new headline. The judge was skin in the game. Up until now, the courtroom had seen arrogance, sarcasm, and subtle power games. But no one expected what was coming next, not even the man behind the bench. Karoline stood with a small digital recorder in her hand, her thumb hovering for just a breath longer than needed. Then she clicked it. The static hit first brief, raw. Then a voice filled the room, low, gruff, male, undeniable. "Gag Karoline, Rains will take care of the rest. Just make sure she doesn't find the April ledger." The words landed like a brick through glass. Everything stopped. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the court stenographer froze, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Karoline didn't look at Rains. She didn't have to. The energy in the courtroom had just turned completely on its axis. The jury looked stunned. The gallery was dead quiet. Even the smirk on Brent Holloway's face had vanished. The game was over. The smirks on Holloway's legal team vanished like a slow earthquake. The weight of the moment rolled toward the bench. Judge Douglas Rains, ironclad and immovable, was visibly shaken. His hand twitched as it reached for his gavel, but stopped midair. His throat flexed, his lips parted, then pressed shut again. Karoline calmly set the recorder on the table. Her voice was measured and deliberate. "This audio was captured under a court-approved wiretap during our investigation into Mr. Holloway's financial misconduct. The voice, as confirmed in our filing, belongs to a senior advisor within the planning department, and the man he referenced is you." Rains finally found his voice, but it wasn't the same as before. "That's not verified," he said, his tone flatter than usual. "It's been manipulated, taken out of context." Karoline replied, lifting another folder. "We anticipated that response, which is why I have here a sworn affidavit from a forensic audio specialist confirming the authenticity of the file. No edits, no splices, no tampering." She walked toward the bench. She wasn't being confrontational. She was being final. "The voice didn't just implicate you. It confirmed the existence of a document you personally signed before pretending you didn't." That was when Rains's hand finally dropped from the gavel. Slowly, he looked past Karoline, as if hoping somebody would intervene, but no one moved. Even Brent Holloway, seated behind his attorney, had gone rigid and pale, like someone had just ripped the rug out from under him. Karoline stood still. The room held its breath, and then she made the call. "Your Honor," she said, not as a courtesy, but as a formality. "Based on the evidence presented and the grave nature of this breach of judicial neutrality, I formally request immediate action." She turned toward the side of the courtroom and gave a subtle nod. A door creaked open. Footsteps echoed on polished tile. Sergeant Miguel Morales, lead court enforcement officer, stepped into view. His uniform was crisp, his posture squared. He carried no weapon, only authority. He paused briefly, then his voice rang out across the chamber. "Judge Douglas Rains, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of judicial authority, and conspiracy to conceal financial crimes under Title 18 of the Arizona State Penal Code." The room exhaled in a mix of gasps and audible disbelief. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Jurors blinked like waking from a trance. Even a few courthouse clerks looked at one another in disbelief, unsure whether to stand or sit. Rains stood trembling. "This is absurd," he barked. "I am the presiding judge. I will not be humiliated in my own courtroom." Karoline didn't respond. She didn't need to. His words were enough. Sergeant Morales approached. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent." "I am not finished," Rains shouted, backing half a step. "Yes, you are," Karoline said softly. It wasn't a declaration. It was a conclusion. Morales moved in. One officer joined him. Together, they took Rains gently, but firmly by the arms as one of them reached into a pouch and pulled out a pair of silver cuffs. The entire room seemed to hold still. Click. The metal clasped around his wrists with a finality that echoed louder than any gavel. Judge Douglas Rains, the man who had once cut lawyers to pieces with nothing more than a stare, now stood silent, cuffed, and standing in the very courtroom he thought he controlled. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but no one answered. Karoline remained at her table, composed. Reporters were already halfway through typing headlines. Cameras clicked. One news intern whispered, "This is going to break national." Morales turned to the gallery. "Clear the aisle." Rains was escorted forward, step by step. He didn't shout again. He didn't protest. He just looked down. The silence that had once been his weapon was now his sentence. As he passed the defense table, Holloway looked up at him, but Rains didn't look back. Whatever partnership had existed between them was gone. Rains reached the side exit. He paused, almost instinctively, as if still expecting someone to intervene, but no one did. The door opened. He was gone. Karoline let her eyes move across the courtroom from the stunned jury to the blinking court. Reporter to the defense attorney. now gripping the edge of his table. Then she stood, her voice cutting through the air like a calm wind after a wildfire. Let the record reflect. This courtroom no longer answers to bias, intimidation, or backroom deals. We answer to the law. And just like that, the trial resumed, but nothing, not the system, not the players, not the stakes would ever be the same again. The sound of the door shutting behind Judge Raines felt heavier than the click of the handcuffs. It was the sound of something ancient finally breaking as the judge vanished from view. The entire courtroom remained frozen, like a still image in time. Not even the jury stirred, not even the defense team whispered. Then, a sudden storm of clicks. Reporters snapped into motion, firing off photo bursts like machine guns. Phones flew into the air. Screens glowing with texts and recordings. Headlines were already being drafted mid-keystroke. Sitting judge arrested mid-trial. Corruption case explodes in Arizona courtroom. Karoline Leavitt turns the tables on the system. Karoline didn't move. She stood still in the center of the legal chaos she had just unleashed. But her silence wasn't hesitation. It was composure, authority, behind the prosecution table. Her team sat wide-eyed, shocked but ready. They hadn't planned this exact outcome, but they had always prepared for it. Because when you go after power, you have to assume it'll try to hit back. The jury looked stunned. Some leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. One older juror, maybe late 60s, reached for his glasses as if seeing the case through new eyes. The court clerk, a young woman in her 20s, looked between Karoline and the now empty bench as if waiting for someone to shout, "Cut." But no one did, and then, almost gently, Karoline spoke. "Let the record show that Judge Douglas Raines has been removed from the bench and taken into custody for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal state-level financial crimes." Her voice echoed not just through the room, but into every headline, every tweet, every camera lens. "This courtroom is not on pause," she continued. "It is now on course." Across the aisle, Brent Holloway sat frozen in his seat. The man who had spent months shielding himself behind his lawyers, political contacts, and backroom favors now looked like a marble statue, hard, silent, and cracking beneath the surface. His attorney, Jackson Miles, leaned in, whispering something sharp and panicked. But Holloway didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the spot where Raines had just stood. Then, slowly, he turned to Karoline. Their eyes met for the first time. There was no arrogance in his face, just one thing: fear. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She walked back to the center of the courtroom floor and picked up the remote to advance her next slide. The projector clicked, displaying the continuation of the financial trail that had just unraveled an empire. "Shall we proceed?" she asked calmly, addressing the acting judge now seated at the bench, Judge Miriam Bledsoe, who had been quietly called in from chambers after the arrest. Judge Bledsoe gave a single nod. The court recognizes Miss Leavitt and grants permission to continue. The rhythm of justice had resumed, but the music had changed. The air was no longer thick with control and intimidation. It felt lighter, clearer, like the fog had been lifted. The room that once belonged to Judge Raines now felt like neutral ground. Karoline advanced the presentation. "What you're seeing now is the disbursement activity for the last fiscal quarter. You'll notice that after the initial $8 million was approved, a second undocumented payment of $9.6 million was released to Holloway Construction within 3 business days of Raines' signature." She pointed to a highlighted field. No state review, no legal oversight, just a direct transfer. And when you connect the timeline to the audio we heard earlier, the pattern becomes unmistakable. The jury took notes furiously. The gallery leaned in. The press row was vibrating with energy. But at the defense table, Jackson Miles knew something that the others didn't. This case was slipping away fast. He leaned over to Holloway again, his voice low but tense. "We need to talk, plea." But Holloway's face had drained of all color. His breathing had grown shallow. His hands trembled slightly beneath the table. Karoline didn't need to hear them to know the message. She could see it in their posture, in their eyes. The fortress was collapsing. She turned back to the jury. "Today's events may seem shocking, but corruption doesn't begin with chaos. It begins with silence, with casual exceptions, with tiny favors between powerful people who think no one's watching." She let her words hang for just a moment, and it ends with accountability from the back row. Samantha Pierce of the Arizona Tribune stood up, not for drama, for duty. She walked quietly toward the hallway, pulling out her phone. She wasn't reporting anymore. She was publishing. The acting judge cleared her throat and addressed the room. This court will take a brief recess to formally update case documentation. Following Judge Raines' removal, we'll resume in 20 minutes. The bailiff nodded. The sound of movement returned, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't noise. It was history shifting. Karoline gathered her documents as her co-counsel leaned in. That was incredible, he whispered. She didn't smile. It was necessary, she said. Now we finished the job. As people filed out of the room, reporters calling their editors, jurors murmuring among themselves. Even Miles stepping out to make a desperate phone call. Karoline remained behind. She walked slowly toward the bench, staring at the empty chair where Raines once sat. The wood looked different now, she whispered to herself, smaller. Just a chair, not a throne. Power doesn't come from the bench. It comes from the truth behind it. She returned to her table because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The dust hadn't even settled when the ripple effects began, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't done. Not even close. The courtroom still held the echo of what had happened. The rest, the headlines, the unraveling. But Karoline wasn't one to stop. At shock waves, she aimed for impact. As the court came back into session, the atmosphere had transformed. Gone was the sense of intimidation. In its place stood a strange mix of tension and trust. Like the entire room was finally breathing clean air again. Karoline rose, standing not just for a prosecution, but for something bigger. She turned toward the bench where Judge Miriam Bledsoe now presided. Your Honor, in light of the evidence introduced today, particularly the scope of unmonitored disbursement sign, requesting immediate authorization to expand our inquiry beyond this single contract. Judge Bledsoe leaned forward. On what grounds? Karoline didn't hesitate. Our preliminary investigation suggests that Brent Holloway's company received not one, but 9 additional contracts from the Arizona Department of Transportation over the past 2 fiscal years. All of them follow similar disbursement patterns, inflated figures, minimal oversight, rush approvals. The courtroom stirred. She continued, I believe what we're looking at today isn't just a case of isolated fraud. It's part of a broader, state-level collusion, possibly implicating multiple departments and multiple officials. She paused, scanning the room. Judge Raines was just the first to fall. The weight of her words rang out like a bell. At the defense table, Jackson Miles sat back, lips pursed, trying to regain control. But his client, Brent Holloway, looked like a man who had just realized the walls were closing in and the exit was no longer behind him. Karoline turned to face him. Mr. Holloway, she said, her tone calm. Would you like to continue this trial and take your chances with the court, or would you prefer to talk? Holloway said nothing at first. Everyone waited. Then, finally, he leaned forward, clearing his throat. If I talk, he said quietly, I need protection. There was the first crack in the stone. Karoline gave the smallest nod, then started talking. That single exchange shifted everything. The court adjourned shortly after, this time not with controversy, but with clarity. Karoline gathered her documents and stepped into the hallway, where microphones were already being lifted toward her. Reporters yelled over one another. Miss Leavitt, did you anticipate this outcome? Will there be more arrests? Is this part of a wider state corruption ring? Karoline didn't answer right away. She paused, then simply said, Justice doesn't end with a headline. It begins when someone refuses to stay silent. She didn't stop for interviews. She wasn't there to perform. She walked past the chaos and back into the courtroom where everything had begun. Inside, her team was still packing up. Co-counsel Jordan Patel approached. So, what now? Karoline exhaled deeply. The adrenaline was wearing off, but not the mission. Now we build the next case, she said. Now we find out how deep this really goes. Jordan nodded, visibly shaken but inspired. Do you think people will actually care? Karoline turned to him. They will, she said, because today they saw that the system can bend, but it doesn't have to break. She sat back down at her table, the same place where hours earlier she had been belittled, interrupted, dismissed. Now, she was the only one still standing. The courtroom was nearly empty now, but Karoline didn't rush. She flipped through the final pages of her case file. Her hands moved with precision, but there was a softness to her expression, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her, and she was allowing herself a second to feel it. Outside, she could hear the noise growing louder, but inside there was peace. She leaned back slightly, glanced once more toward the empty judge's bench, and whispered to herself, "Today, justice didn't sleep." And then she closed the folder, because tomorrow the real work would begin. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers through the quiet courage of someone who refuses to look away. Karoline didn't change the system in one day, but she reminded us all that truth has weight and silence has consequences. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on your own definition of accountability, leave us a comment below. What does justice mean to you? Have you ever stood alone when it would have been easier to walk away? We'd love to hear your voice. And if stories like this matter to you, real stories of truth, courage, and consequence, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on this journey. Thank you for being here. And remember, justice may bend, but with the right hands, it can still rise.